Under a pale morning sky in Gyeongju, South Korea, the final day of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit began in quiet ceremony. The vast conference hall glowed under camera lights as leaders filed in one by one, their blue scarves perfectly aligned, their expressions composed. Each step, each glance carried diplomatic weight. The theme of the summit, shared prosperity through resilience, echoed not only through speeches, but in the symbolism of the image that was about to define the day. South Korean President Lee Myung stood at the center of the stage, poised and confident. Hosting APEC had been a test of Seoul's rising diplomatic stature, and Lee's leadership style, pragmatic, articulate and steady, reflected a nation intent on bridging divides between the Pacific's rival powers. To his right stood Chinese President Xi Jinping, whose presence drew immediate attention. To Lee's left, Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong exchanged a courteous nod with Xi, two leaders who in the past year have quietly advanced dialogue on trade stability and regional cooperation. From the side platform, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent adjusted his tie before stepping into the formation. Representing Washington's delegation, Bessent's presence symbolized a recalibrated US approach, less confrontational, more measured, but still deeply watchful. Close by, Japan's Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, greeted her counterparts with a composed smile, the first Japanese female leader to attend an APEC summit in that role, signaling both continuity and change in Tokyo's diplomacy. As the leaders took their positions, the hum of the cameras intensified. The host broadcaster's voice announced the moment. "Leaders, please hold for the photo." A brief silence followed before the hall filled with synchronized applause. The photograph captured not only unity, but complexity. 21 economies standing side by side, aware that beneath the symbolism of blue scarves lay competing visions of global order. Xi Jinping's expression remained calm, deliberate. His quiet conversation with Lawrence Wong moments earlier had drawn subtle glances. Observers noted how both men seemed intent on sending a message of steady cooperation amid global volatility. Resilience, Xi had said earlier in the week, is built not through isolation, but through shared responsibility. The line, though understated, resonated through corridors of power from Beijing to Washington. Behind the public gestures lay days of negotiations. Delegates had debated late into the night over trade mechanisms, digital governance, and the rules of supply chain transparency. Beijing's team had pushed for stronger acknowledgement of inclusive growth, a phrase used often in Chinese diplomacy to counter the narrative of Western economic dominance. In contrast, the American delegation, led by Bessent, underscored fair competition and open markets, a careful balancing act between defending national interest and maintaining global credibility. Between those two poles, middle powers like South Korea and Singapore worked to preserve the spirit of multilateralism that had defined APEC for decades. Lee Jae-myung's closing address the previous evening had struck a tone of quiet confidence. "The Asia-Pacific," he said, "must become an architecture of trust, not tension." His words drew nods from several delegations, including Vietnam, Chile, and the Philippines, nations whose economies depend heavily on maintaining equilibrium between the United States and China. Gyeongju, an ancient Korean capital, had been chosen deliberately to symbolize continuity between heritage and the future. For South Korea, hosting this summit was both a statement of identity and a declaration of ambition. As the applause from the photo faded, the leaders relaxed briefly. Xi turned toward Lee and extended his hand. The handshake, captured instantly by dozens of cameras, became the defining image of the day. The two men exchanged polite words, a conversation inaudible but understood as significant. For Seoul, it was a moment of validation. For Beijing, it was an opportunity to project stability amid external scrutiny and economic headwinds. Away from the stage, aides and negotiators finalized the summit communiqué. It was a document of careful phrasing and restrained ambition. The language avoided confrontation. References to economic coercion were softened, while phrases like mutual growth and technological inclusivity took center stage. Analysts in the press gallery described it as diplomatic minimalism, thin on enforcement, rich in symbolism. Yet, for a region navigating competing alliances, even symbolic consensus mattered. Across the press room, commentators noted subtle shifts in tone compared to previous summits. The American delegation had adopted a lower-profile strategy, opting for behind-the-scenes engagement rather than headline-making statements. Scott Bessent, known for his background in global markets, spoke briefly to reporters afterward. "Our goal is stability," he said. "Economic security begins with predictability." It was a departure from the rhetoric of confrontation that had dominated earlier administrations. Meanwhile, Japan's Sane Takaichi emphasized innovation and security as twin pillars of her agenda. In her statement, she urged cooperation on semiconductor supply chains, a topic that drew strong support from South Korea and Taiwan's representatives. "Technology must unite, not divide," she said. "That is how we secure the future." Her words, pragmatic and clear, encapsulated Japan's evolving diplomatic strategy in a world where economic policy and national security have become inseparable. As the summit transitioned into its final hours, journalists focused on Xi Jinping's demeanor. Unlike the defensive tone seen at the San Francisco APEC the previous year, this time Xi appeared composed, even conciliatory. Chinese officials later distributed a short press note quoting him as saying, "Regional peace is sustained by mutual respect and pragmatic cooperation." The message was subtle but unmistakable. China was signaling continuity, not confrontation. Outside the main hall, the blue scarves worn by leaders fluttered in the autumn breeze. The organizing committee had explained the choice of color as symbolizing resilience through shared oceans. For many, it was more than a metaphor. It was a visual reminder of interdependence. Trade routes, shipping lanes, and digital cables now form the invisible threads binding the Pacific economies together. In an age of rising protectionism, that shared ocean is both a bridge and a fault line. As night fell over Gyeongju, spotlights illuminated the banners of the 21 economies. Delegations exchanged handshakes, business cards, and polite farewells. But the subtext was clear: the world order is shifting, and Asia-Pacific leaders are recalibrating their roles within it. The summit's key deliverables, a digital commerce framework and a clean energy transport initiative, were modest in scope but symbolically significant. Both reflected a regional commitment to modernization and sustainability at a time when global trade faces fragmentation. In interviews that followed, South Korean officials called the summit a turning point. For Lee Jae-myung, it was not just a diplomatic success, but a demonstration of Seoul's role as a convening power, one capable of balancing competing blocs while maintaining credibility with both. Gyeongju has reminded the world, a senior aide said, that Asia can lead with stability and vision. As delegations departed, Xi's motorcade rolled quietly through the ancient city's narrow roads. The streetlights reflected off the windows of the convoy, while volunteers lined the sidewalks waving small APEC flags. In his final on-camera remark before boarding his flight, Xi reiterated China's message of continuity. "We seek regional stability and shared development." It was brief, deliberate, and in line with the tone he had maintained throughout the summit. The next morning, headlines across Asia described the Gyeongju meeting as measured, symbolic, and quietly consequential. While no sweeping breakthroughs emerged, the summit restored a degree of predictability to a region accustomed to uncertainty. The image of 21 leaders standing shoulder to shoulder, Xi, Lee, Wang, Bessent, and Takaichi among them, encapsulated the moment's essence: fragile unity in a turbulent world. As technicians dismantled the stage and the last flags were lowered, the quiet of Gyeongju returned. Yet the conversations that began there about trade fairness, digital sovereignty, and clean energy are set to continue across capitals from Beijing to Washington. In the end, the summit's success lay not in declarations, but in the dialogue itself. Under the soft light of Gyeongju, the Asia-Pacific reminded the world that diplomacy's most powerful moments often happen not in words, but in gestures, in the stillness of a handshake, the symbolism of a color, and the calm resolve to keep talking in a divided age.